The Classic Comics Forum podcast presents issue number 9, Captain America by Steve Englehart, Part 2. Welcome back to the Classic Comics Forum podcast. I'm your host, Scott Harris, and in this episode we present part 2 of my discussion with the Captain about Steve Englehart's legendary run on Captain America from issues 153 to 186. In the first episode, we discussed issues 153 to 168. So in this episode, we get to the real heart of his run, the Secret Empire storyline from number 169 to 175, and the Man Without a Country storyline from issues 176 to 186. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into the action, starting with the beginning of the Secret Empire storyline in Captain America number 169. Enjoy. Back and ready to discuss the Secret Empire storyline. Arguably the most famous storyline in Captain America history. Starts with issue 169 and runs through issue 175. 169, right off the bat, we start... Things happen. Unlike the last several issues where nothing was happening, really, with all this Yellow Claw nonsense. Here we get stuff going on right away where the Falcon has decided if he's going to still be Captain America's partner, he needs to get his own powers. So Cap sets him up with the Black Panther, and they go off to figure out some way to do this. Meanwhile, the ad campaign storyline that's been burbling since issue 163 comes to a head. There's a thing called CRAP, the Committee to Regain America's Principles. And of course, that is a play on CREEP, which was the Committee to Re-elect the President, the organization that was behind Watergate. So, in this issue, basically, Moonstone, this new villain, Moonstone, shows up, and as part of this storyline leading into 170 as well, they basically have this elaborate scheme to discredit Cap by kind of framing him for murder, where Moonstone actually kills a guy, but it looks like Captain America did it because he lost control of his super strength.
Yeah, it's interesting that they bring back the Tumbler, who I don't think we've seen since Tales of Suspense, kind of as this villain who gets into a fight with Steve and then wanders off. Steve runs into him again later on at this charity event. I believe that they were going to fight for charity or something along those lines, and then Steve basically touches him and he falls over and dies. It's a little bit more involved than him just touching him, but it appears, to your point, as if Steve has gone ahead and killed someone in his rage of anger, which plays entirely into the ad campaign where he's a vigilante who has no controls, no oversight, does what he wants, whatever he wants, and here he is taking out this poor man who may be a criminal, may be a villain, but does Cap have the right to pass judgment and sentence on him?
Right. So Cap ends up in jail, and in issue 170, the end of issue 170, there's a jailbreak. And a group of people claiming to be Cap's, helpers or followers or whatever are here to break him out of jail so we can clear his name. And he's like, I don't want to be broken out of jail. There's due process. He's sort of on the dilemma for a little bit, but he decides to stay, and they basically just clock him and drag him along because it's all part of the scheme to make him look bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that he, even though he's being portrayed as this guy who will do anything and has no rules and no code, and he's just off doing his own thing, it's like he's got the perfect opportunity to leave, and he decides, you know what, I'm still the good guy, I'm still the same person I've always been, despite what these these ads are saying about me, and yeah, he's I'm just going to stay here. I'm not going to run. And yeah, the followers decide, well, we'll just take you, and yeah, they drag him off.
Now, in 171, Falcon returns. He had his own little thing going on over in Africa, where Layla got kidnapped by this guy, whatever. That was kind of a sidelight that didn't mean anything, in my opinion. So, important part is Falcon comes back. He's got his new nifty wings where he can sort of fly now. And the Avengers basically tell him, Cap's on the run, and we need you to bring him in because it's just looking bad. And so he tracks down Cap, but of course he's on Cap's side. One thing I wanted to mention about these issues is that these were actually scripted not by Englehart at all, but by Mike Friedrich. Over Englehart plots. I think, considering what a classic and famous storyline this is, I had completely forgotten that Mike Friedrich had anything to do with it. I'm not usually a fan of Mike Friedrich's work. So I think he probably doesn't get as much recognition as he should for his contributions to the storyline.
Oh, agreed. It's always Englehart's Secret Empire story. It you just kind of forget that he was part. Friedrich was part of it as well. Um, I've never read anything of his that I was terribly impressed with. But going back to this and realizing, yeah, he was part of this. Um, at least I can give him credit for his contribution to the storyline.
So by the end of this issue, we've started getting into the Secret Empire stuff. Cap and Falcon are on the run. They realize there's this conspiracy. They don't know who to trust, but they're going to track down, the people in charge. And in 172, that leads them to go to Nashville. And I gotta be honest, for me, this storyline takes a sudden right turn here where they just completely randomly run into Banshee on a street corner. And he attacks them, and then the X-Men show up. And now this is during the period where the X-Men were is after their title had been canceled and before it relaunched. So they were sort of out in the middle of nowhere. But anyway, this to me seemed really random and just not nearly as well thought out as the previous stuff. We had a lot of intrigue and political stuff going on with him being framed by the ad campaign, and now all of a sudden it's these full page splashes of Banshee fighting Cyclops. And I think the reason is explained actually in the letter column of the next issue, where Englehart says that he had a much longer and more involved storyline planned here, but the events of Watergate have kind of made him feel like the rug's been pulled out from under him because the points he was trying to make are no longer, they've already been made by reality. So he has decided to just wrap up this storyline as fast as he can so he can move on to something else. And that's something that I wasn't really aware of previously, but I think it's really noticeable starting in issue 172, about halfway through the issue when Banshee shows up. And for the rest of the Secret Empire storyline, all the way up to 175, I get the impression that he's just trying to finish this off so we can get to the next part.
Yeah, I was as I was rereading this, I was taking some notes, and the way that Steve and Sam figure out the head to Nashville is so convoluted. It's like you're really squinting at it to try to have it make any sense. And yeah, then they get there, and why is Banshee in Nashville? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And then the X-Men are after Banshee, and then they team up with them, and they think, well, this is the same group that's trying to destroy him, is trying to destroy us. Well, what makes you think that? It was throwing this piece into it. And again, it's one of those things where you would have liked to have seen what they could have done if he'd had the full amount of time to let this thing bake. Instead, he just kind of turned up the oven to get it to cook through a little faster, and you wind up with something that isn't exactly quite right.
Yeah, this storyline, as classic as it is considered now, and we'll get into this a little more later, I feel like the real classic parts of this are not in the Secret Empire storyline at all. They're in the Man Without a Country storyline that follows. and that the importance of those issues has sort of reverse trickled down onto the Secret Empire story, because the Secret Empire story starts great. The first three issues with Moonstone and Viper and stuff are, and the ad campaigns, I mean, are really good and really interesting. But the rest of these issues, 172, 173, 174, 175, they just do not live up to the hype. They don't live up to their own potential. You can feel Englehart trying to get to the point so he can do something more interesting in his mind. And I wonder what he originally had planned. Part of me thinks he's wrong. Like, if he had done his original story, just reading the first, like, three parts, I think it could have been just as powerful, even with Watergate overshadowing it. Whatever it was, it certainly would have been better done than what we end up getting in these issues.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think that you really look at it in retrospect, and you don't get the Man Without a Country storyline unless you've got this, and so from association, this seems better. Well, this is what led into that, and I think the other piece that why this storyline gets the acclaim it does is because Englehart himself has said that when he turned in issue 175, and the higher ups at Marvel asked him, you know, do you mean this to be Richard Nixon? And he told them no. And then later on, he's flat out admitted, I told them that because they wouldn't have published it otherwise. And so he tells them no. They publish it, and afterwards he's like, "Yeah, that was Richard Nixon." And I think it was because he took such a public shot at the president in what was considered. I mean, let's face it, comic books in the early '70s were still a medium for kids. This was not, the comic books of today where there are more adults reading than the children. This was a serious storyline for a thing aimed at least teens, if not children, which is why I think that it gets more acclaim than it really should.
Yeah, so I think we're going to follow Englehart's lead and sort of wrap up the rest of these as fast as we can so we can get to the good stuff. 173, 174, 175, they team up with the X-Men, and Falcon and Cap go undercover into the Secret Empire. And there's a couple details here that really point out how shoddy Englehart was being, how slapdash he was being, because it doesn't make a lick of sense where they go undercover, join the Secret Empire, and the Secret Empire sends them on a mission, and when they go on the mission, they do it in costume as Captain America and the Falcon. Like, that just seems so stupid that... anyway. Also, it turns out that the guy who, they steal this device and from this building, and this guy catches them but then lets them go. And then the next issue, it turns out the reason he let them go is because he also was working for the Secret Empire. And there was a line in issue 174 that I thought was hilarious, where the editors had a note saying, "Don't you recognize Mr. Black from last issue?" To the readers.
Yeah.
Except he looks completely different, because in the last issue he had a giant mustache, and in this issue he doesn't. So there's no possible way from the art that the reader could ever figure out who the hell it was supposed to be, because they drew a completely different character. So again, that's just a detail that seemed to just fall through the cracks. Like, they were just pushing this out too fast and not paying attention to what they were doing. In 175, everything gets tied up together. The ad guy and Moonstone are being directed by number one, the leader of the Secret Empire, and they show up in Washington, D.C., and they basically are pretending there's I forget if they're pretending there's an alien invasion or what, but the point is Moonstone pretends to fight off the Secret Empire saucer ships, and he goes on board, he comes back out, and he's like, "I'm sorry, America, you're just going to have to surrender. Their technology is too powerful. We're all going to die." But just then Captain America shows up and reveals the whole scheme and saves the day, and it turns out that number one leading the secret empire is Richard Nixon, and he shoots himself in the head in the Oval Office, and that's the end of the series, the end of the storyline. And the last like 3 pages of the story are just synopsis. It was like there's like 15 pages worth of material that are just crammed into 3 pages because they just wanted to finish it. All like the final fight and the explanation and Moonstone like turning evidence and everything that happens just take place in like half a page. It's just like super condensed. So yeah, a lot of flaw, a lot of really interesting ideas in this story, and as we're about to discuss, it's set up what is legitimately one of the greatest storylines in Captain America history. But as a story itself, if you just read 169 to 175, it's kind of a mess. There's some really good parts, and then there's some real head scratchers.
Yeah, a couple things in 175 that really bothered me as a reader. And again, maybe if I'd read this at the time it was coming out and I was more in that target audience, hadn't read however many thousands of comic books I've read to this point. But we've got at the end of 174, everybody's shot with this atomic annihilator gun, and we find out that Gabe Jones has infiltrated the secret empire. And okay, I can go along with that. That kind of makes sense. But he's brought someone else along with him, and it's Peggy Carter. And he makes a comment that he brought her along as backup because there wasn't much danger. Okay, you've got this woman who had suffered mental problems for years and was only within the last year of real time and issue time, who knows how long it was, and you bring her along on this mission where you're infiltrating this, top secret organization, and you're in charge of their guns, and you just turned the dial down on the gun a little bit so it didn't kill people, and it was one of those things where you're reading it as an adult and you're thinking, did they honestly think that this would pass muster if somebody looked at this critically? Because none of this makes any sense. And then the piece that you'd mentioned with Moonstone, and it's like, okay, so he's telling them that everyone should lay down because these people are so tough. Moonstone, who the hell are you? You've been on the scene for like 3 minutes now, and you're telling America to lay down. And do you think that, I don't know, the Avengers might say something about it, or Spider-Man or Thor or any of the other heroes that exist? We're going to take this no-name jabroni's word for it that we have to lay down our guns because here's the secret out. Here's these aliens who are just so powerful. It just he threw so much at the wall in this issue, hoping that he could concoct enough pages to get to the end of it. And this issue was really just a microcosm of everything from when they go to Nashville to now. It's just a hot mess.
Agreed. So, on the heels of that, though, we get issue 176, which for me is an absolutely fantastic issue. And in a way, it sort of justifies Englehart's feelings that he wanted to just skip ahead to the good stuff, because this issue is there's no action, it's all talk. It's just Steve and different people in his life talking about what happened and what Captain America means to people, and whether he should stay Captain America, what he should do going forward. And it's almost like, because of the current events that were happening at the time with Watergate, the subtext was so understood by the readers that it actually didn't need all the setup for people to understand it, which is good because it didn't get the setup. I thought 176, though, was a great issue. And I also found myself agreeing more with some of the people arguing with Steve than I did with Steve himself. Iron Man in particular, I thought, made a pretty compelling argument about why the superheroes were important, but Steve wasn't having it. He was just too disillusioned.
Yeah, it's a powerful issue. I mean, because you've got this character who has been defined by his association with the flag, and his creation was to help the war effort. And here he is, and he's reached the end. it's not the same for him anymore. And so for me, it's one of these issues where you read it and you're just like, have I ever been that disillusioned with something in my life that I believed in so strongly, and now I just I just don't get it anymore. And it was really really well done. It was such a nice shift from the mess that the last few issues were to get to this and have real meat where he's not punching anybody and he's not going undercover anywhere. It's just a conversation, and sometimes it's just conversation with himself. But it's an incredibly powerful issue um, that it's one of my favorites in the entire series. I would say probably at least top 10, if not top 5.
Yeah, it's a terrific issue, and the momentum is not lost because the next issue, 177, is also a great issue. Here we have another issue like 154, where with Cap sort of out of the picture, the book is really all about Falcon now. And Falcon ends up squaring off against Lucifer, not not Satan, but rather the alien from X-Men. Side note, I definitely get the idea that someone, I don't know if it was Roy or if it was Steve, had been reading a lot of X-Men back issues, because this, between Lucifer and the actual X-Men showing up, and then a group of X-Men villains that appeared several issues earlier, there's a lot of like random X-Men characters showing up here. But this is a spotlight on the Falcon, and it's not just a spotlight in terms of the Falcon fighting alone. Lucifer ends up merging with the Falcon's arch rival in Harlem, Rafe. And this Rafe subplot has been going on through the entire Englehart series. It's about to be tied up in a really unusual way, because Lucifer ends up merging with him and splitting into two people. And so now there's two Lucifers, but they each only have half the power, and blah, blah, blah. There's a great section in here where Lucifer's like blasting with these lasers, and he says something to Falcon like, do you think just a guy that can flap around, can possibly stop my incredible power? And the Falcon looks at him with this look that's basically like really skeptical. And he says, well, I'm gonna try. I loved that line. Like, for some reason, that line just seemed like a perfect Falcon line, where he's like, he realizes he's completely overmatched and is probably gonna lose. But you know what? He's gonna give it a go anyway. He's gonna try. He's gotta try. I just really dug that. And I also just appreciated that this issue is like, Steve is in it a little bit, but his soul searching is basically just the context to frame the Falcon's like real world issues. Falcon's got problems, with his girlfriend, with his neighborhood, with supervillains, and meanwhile Steve is just kind of moping around thinking about all these like high level existential problems.
Yeah, and I think that the thought to keep Steve out of it, of course, plays in well for the next few issues, because Sam is really learning what he can do on his own. I mean, he got a little taste of that earlier in Englehart's run, but here he's really jumped up in power level against an alien, which he's not used to fighting, and he's holding his own and he's trying, and it's good to see kind of this spotlight on him, really working through what's going on in his life, while Steve is, there was no reason really to focus on Steve's soul searching, because we got all of that last issue, and I think if Englehart had written more of that and more of the focus of this issue had been on that, 176 would have really lost its impact. It would have been back to the old "woe is me, Bucky's dead because of me," and it's really not here. It's okay. We see where Steve's at, but we're going to move on because we actually have a superhero in this book still, whose name is above the marquee in the Falcon.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. And in 178, we get more Falcon fighting Lucifer, and it comes to an unusual conclusion where Lucifer basically burns himself out and drops dead. And so the two hosts that he has taken, which is Rafe and the guy that used to be Ares, they both die. Now they're just like the physical hosts, so Lucifer's spirit is just shunted back into whatever dimension he's from. But it's kind of an odd way for that, story to end, where Falcon's like fighting these guys and they just die. And it was also an interesting way to tie up the Rafe subplot that had been running for 30 issues, where he merges with an alien and burns himself out and drops dead.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of Englehart had written himself into a corner here because Lucifer was on his own, even split, still way more powerful than Sam's going to handle. And maybe going into the the two issues, he thought, yeah, I can make this work, and then he realized maybe I can't come up with a way for Sam to beat an alien life force and as powerful as he was. And so I felt kind of the ending was a cop out, and that Sam doesn't really win. The other guy loses, and it's kind of it takes away from what he kind of built in 177. At the end of this, it's just the ending on it left me flat.
There were some interesting bits in here. There's a part where Cap just can't help himself and jumps into action to help Falcon, and Falcon tells him to get stuffed. We also get the introduction of Roscoe, a kid from the hood who works at the gym where Steve is working out, and Roscoe, of course, is going to become very important. And also in this issue, we get the first replacement Cap, where with Captain America gone, everyone's like, well, I'll be the new Captain America, No one's filling this. And the first guy that does it is a baseball player, like a professional athlete. And on his first mission out, he basically mistimes a swing on a rope and crashes into a wall and breaks his arm. And that's it for him. We also finally get some movement on the Peggy subplot, which has been going on for 17 issues now, where Steve finally tells her that they can't have a romance, and she runs off crying. So a good job, I guess, Steve, for finally manning up. It only took a year and a half to do it. So now we get on to 179, and 179 is a favorite issue of mine. Captain America is he's basically out with Sharon, and they're sort of enjoying themselves and their new life of no responsibility. And suddenly this guy called the Golden Archer attacks them, and he's talking in these like medieval riddles about how he's going to kill Captain America and blah, blah, blah. Long story short, it turns out that the Golden Archer is actually Hawkeye, and he's trying to sort of make Cap see that he's being an idiot. And Cap's like, well, I can't be Captain America anymore. And Hawkeye says, well, you don't have to be Captain America, You could still be a superhero. You don't have to call yourself Captain America. Just pick a new identity, Hank Pym does it every other day. And Cap's like, oh, I never thought of that. Okay, that's a great idea. One thing I really dig about this issue is that it's kind of like a key moment in the relationship between Cap and Hawkeye, where they had in the Cap's Kooky Quartet issues of Avengers, they'd started off as butting heads all the time, and they're at each other's throats, and Hawkeye didn't seem to have any respect for Cap. By this point, they have a little talk here where it's like Hawkeye basically acknowledges that Cap was kind of like a father figure, took him under his wing, taught him the right way to do things, and now he's trying to, pay it back. There's like mutual respect. I love the relationship between these two characters, and this is like a key issue sort of establishing that.
Yeah, I mean, it starts out and it just seems so goofy. It's like, who the hell is the Golden Archer? And what's the purpose? Where is this going? And as you get into it, and then you get the reveal at the end when it's Hawkeye, and you just think to yourself, yeah, you look back, and again, we who are collectors and have long runs and have read so many issues, then you can look back at other pieces of their relationship and start to put that together and go, yeah, if you look at it, from this angle, yeah, this completely makes sense that Clint would do this for him. And, it is kind of interesting that, it never dawned on Steve, well, look, you've got this ability, you have these strength, you have these powers. Why don't you just not be Captain America anymore, but do something different? You can still help people. You can still, um, kind of do the superhero thing. Just don't represent the country that you don't feel you can do anymore. And it took Hawkeye to make him see that. So it's just kind of funny that Steve, who always seems so level-headed, kind of completely missed that angle he could have taken.
All right, so Cap decides he's gonna create a new super identity. In 180, it's revealed his new character is called Nomad. There's a kind of a funny sequence where he's trying to figure out what to name his character, his new identity, and he's like trying to design the outfit, and he ends up designing a cape, an outfit with a cape on it. And then at the end of the issue, when he's fighting the new Serpent Squad, he steps on his own cape and they get away. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, made me think of the movie The Incredibles. Every time I read that or see that, it's like you don't want a cape. It's just going to get in the way. And for a serious book like this to have a moment like that, which yeah, it seems goofy, but honestly, it just makes sense. Here's a guy not used to working with a cape, and yeah, he's going to have a problem with it. So I like that touch. Definitely enjoyed that.
This is a really good issue. Basically, at the beginning, Madam Hydra shows up. We haven't seen her in a long time. And she shows up and murders the Viper. So, our ad man guy, who's driven behind the scenes a lot of the action so far in the series, just like that, murdered in cold blood. And then she takes his name as the Viper, reforms the Serpent Squad, lying to the original Viper's brother, saying that she was trying to save him and Viper got killed in like a prison break or something. And then basically goes on this mission where she's like the face of nihilism. She doesn't have any of these other political agendas. She just wants to see the world burn, basically. And in order to do that, she's gotten involved with this effort by Warlord Krang, of all people, to find the Serpent Crown and resurrect the lost island of Lemuria.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things where you're like, okay, where did he come up with this? I mean, because Krang is definitely not a Captain America character, but you bring him in here, and Viper brings in the new Viper, Madam Hydra, brings in Princess Python, which again, not a Captain America character, and just kind of wondering what was influencing Englehart at this point, and who was influencing Englehart at this point to kind of bring in these really disparate um, elements to the book at this juncture, because he's really going off in a kind of an odd direction with some of this. Not that it didn't work; it was just kind of something brand new, and it was welcome because he wasn't falling back on the same old, but really trying something out of the box.
Yeah. Now this storyline is going to go for a couple issues. In 181, Nomad ends up teaming up with Namor to track down the Serpent Crown, stop Warlord Krang, and they do, but Viper and Cobra get away. This is kind of like an action-packed issue. There's not a whole lot going on subplot-wise, except key moment back in New York, Roscoe ends up donning the Captain America costume. He becomes the third replacement Cap, and at this point, the Falcon decides to try and protect Roscoe, takes him under his wing a little bit. He's like, he doesn't think for a minute that this is going to work, but he wants to make sure that Roscoe doesn't get his butt kicked like the previous two Captain Americas. So he basically takes him on patrol to try and keep him alive. And that's going to, it's not going to work. Let's just say that. So skipping ahead to 182, here's where things got really interesting for me in terms of Viper and the Serpent Squad, where at this point Viper is basically just on a suicide mission. She's just trying to blow up and kill everything she can. And Cobra's with her, and he doesn't want any part of this. He's just stuck, you know. He's realized that she's completely crazy and has some weird agenda that he had no idea about. But he's, in the middle of a firefight. He has no way out. I read Steve Englehart on his website said that at this point, the whole point of Viper and the Serpent Squad was his version of the Symbionese Liberation Army, which was like this weird terrorist group in the early 70s. And he had this idea that he could use Captain America to address current events through analogs like the Serpent Squad. But he eventually decided that there was too big of a lag time in terms of the development of the book. He's running 4 or 5 months behind, and current events were just constantly going to outstrip what he was trying to do. So this, I think, was his sort of last effort to try and do that after the Watergate thing. But I found Madame Viper, like, she's such a different character compared to all the other supervillains because she's nuts. Like, she's trying to kill everybody. She doesn't care if she dies. She just wants everyone else to die too. And all the other villains even are trying to get out of her way because she's berserk.
Yeah, you're off the rails when the other bad guys are like, look, you're nuts. I'm out of here. And I think it worked for her. She in the previous issue, where she's yelling at the Roxxon executive, she's like, I'm the hardest person you'll ever meet. My sex doesn't make me weak. And she's just there, and she's going to take down as many people as she can. And I think it was, a really interesting choice to bring her into this. I mean, she hadn't been seen in a long time, and to use her as you'd mentioned as an analog for the SLA was fine. And kind of where he went with this was kind of interesting. From the technical aspect of this book, I really don't like the artwork. Um, we talked about Sal Buscema earlier. The Frank Robbins has taken over the art on this book, and it's just not my cup of tea at all on that.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So I think it's with issue 180. All of a sudden, Sal Buscema's gone, and Frank Robbins, of all people, takes over the art. And Robbins seems
That's
to be a sort of love him or hate him artist. I actually really like his art. However, it doesn't suit every book. Like, there's some books where I think he's spot on his style. I don't think this was the best fit for him. There was moments where, and we're going to get to this in the next issue, 183. Let me just jump ahead to 183, because 183 is a famous issue. And in 183, what happens is Roscoe and Falcon are on patrol. There's a bank robbery, and people are putting money in the bank, and they're like, what the hell? I think this actually happens right at the end of 182. And it turns out that the bad guy is the Red Skull. And so once once Nomad, Steve Rogers, gets back from his adventures fighting the Serpent Squad, he is trying to find the Falcon, but the Falcon's been missing, and he eventually tracks down Falcon and Roscoe, and it turns out that Roscoe is dead. And the Red Skull was so ticked off when he discovered that there was a fake Captain America, that he murdered Roscoe and just sort of hung him up as a warning. And then he beat the crap out of Falcon and left him also as a warning to the real Captain America. And so Cap decides that he needs to become Captain America again and become the symbol, because people need the symbol. And if he doesn't, people are going to keep co-opting the symbol. So he takes on the symbol and becomes Captain America again. And the lead into this was that the art where he finds Roscoe dead by Frank Robbins, you can't even really tell what the hell's going on. You can kind of guess, I guess, but it's not well done. I do like Frank Robbins' work on a lot of other books, but Yeah, I don't think he was really a great choice here.
No, it's funny because the cover shows one image of Roscoe being strung up, and the art in the book, the panel, is completely different. I mean, his the orientation of Roscoe's body is off, and you just it's just such a poorly drawn panel, and you don't really understand what's going on from the art. Which, I mean, in a visual medium, that's what you want. You want to be able to see what's going on, and here it's not good.
No, it's bad. The only way you can tell what's happening in that scene is because you've seen it on the cover. But so Captain America's back, his soul searching is done, and now he's got to track down the Red Skull. This leads into Englehart's final storyline in issues 184 to 186, where Cap's back. And I gotta say, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. This is by far my least favorite Englehart storyline. I like it even less than I liked the Yellow Claw storyline. It's not helped by the Frank Robbins art, but it's basically the Skull is killing these guys, and Cap and Falcon, they're trying to stop them, but somehow, no matter what they do, the people end up dying. And at the end, it turns out it's because the Falcon has been working for Red Skull all along. And this issue 186, Englehart's last issue, with the new origin of the Falcon, is one of the biggest mistakes in the whole run of Captain America, and by far the worst thing that Englehart ever did on the book.
Well, it's character assassination of Sam first and foremost. But the problem I have with it is that it's his last issue, and so you basically take this steaming dump on Sam's character, and then you walk away, and you leave that there for the next writer to have to deal with. You've taken a character who we've come to know, we've come to love for now it's 70 issues. You're talking 170, yeah, about 70 issues, and everything you know about him is wrong, and he's really an agent of the Skull, and he's a drug dealer and a hood, and it's like, really? And now you want to walk away from it. If he'd had, I honestly think that if Englehart had stayed on the book and had a chance to develop it and maybe take it somewhere, who knows what the opinion of the story would have been. But just to write this and slaughter Sam the way he did, and then leave after that is just egregious.
I completely agree. Now, according to Englehart, he had plotted the story out, but he wasn't going to actually write this issue. But the guy, I forget his name, who was turning the book over to, basically told Englehart he wanted Englehart to write this one himself. Ostensibly, it was because there was so much continuity being referenced that he didn't have a full handle on it. I wouldn't be surprised if the ulterior motive was he didn't want his name on this crap, because, yeah, so for those who haven't read it, basically it turns out that Falcon's been working for the Red Skull all along. Not only that, but he's not Sam Wilson, the social worker, at all. He's actually Snap Wilson, a two-bit pimp and thug who the Red Skull took and used the Cosmic Cube to create a perfect sidekick for Captain America. So he sanded off all the rough edges and made the most sort of Boy Scouty, goody two shoes person he could think of, as a way to trap Captain America into liking him. And for several issues leading up to this, in the letter column, people were complaining that Falcon wasn't very interesting anymore. Something that I don't agree with, but I can see why they were saying that, because in the early parts of Englehart's run, there was a lot of attention being paid to Falcon's personal life. And later on, he only appeared as the Falcon for quite a while. In fact, I might be wrong, but I think he only appeared as Sam, the social worker, a couple times in the earliest issues, and after that, it was all Falcon. So I get where they're coming from, but in the letter column, the answer that Englehart and the editors had was that they had some plan in place to make Falcon much more interesting, and just wait till you see it. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be a shocker. And it's just such a terrible idea. It seemed like they felt that the only way you could have an interesting black character was if it was a black exploitation, you know, character right out of Shaft or Dolomite or something, and that characters that are African American, if they weren't, wearing a giant fur coat, and carrying a gold-plated Glock, then they weren't interesting. So they took this great, role model character, a guy who's trying to, do good things for his community, and just turned him into a black exploitation cliche. It's it's boggling to me. It's just boggling.
Yeah, and the letters, you know, complaining about, the character being boring. I mean, first off, he was second banana in the book, and I don't think we should forget that. Is yes, it's Captain America and the Falcon, but it's ostensibly Cap's book, and the Falcon's there. The second piece is, you know, really they needed to focus on Steve's issues throughout the Secret Empire, and then the Man Without a Country storylines, because that was some heavy hitting stuff, and I think so. Maybe Sam got shuffled to the back a little bit, but to have to take this guy who was a an upstanding citizen, and someone who's trying to do right, and when they had more of a focus on him. He was constantly butting heads with, I believe it's Morgan, the crime boss of Harlem. You have this guy who had a lot going for it, and then just to take that and completely throw that away because we need to spice it up a little bit is just it's really sad to see. Now, thankfully, it's was not long lived, but just even the fact that they went there with that, to your point, and made him a caricature of a black exploitation character is really disheartening.
And as you said, it's a really unfortunate way for Englehart to end his run on the series. After this issue, Englehart left the book because he was given the opportunity to write a Savage sort of Conan style black and white adult magazine about Thor, which never actually came out. So he basically ended his legendary run in Captain America for no reason, and instead they gave him some other title once the Thor book went by the boards. And that was pretty much it for his time on Captain America. Now, he was still writing Avengers for a while, so he was writing the character of Captain America in the pages of Avengers. But this was it. On the whole, when you take all, 35 issues or however many there are as a whole, what do you think the lasting impact or legacy of Steve Englehart's run is?
Yeah, I think I think what it did was it laid the groundwork, obviously, for future stories where Steve questions who he is, and not as the man out of time, but is he supposed to be the symbol of America? Um, you know, Before this, there was never a doubt. There was never a question. It was always, I'm the Star Spangled Avenger. I'm the guy fighting for America. And this really, I think, allowed the character of Steve Rogers to have this doubt. This was the first crack in his unwavering armor, and so it wasn't just the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, square-jawed hero who just fought any foe on behalf of America. It was somebody who was now more thoughtful, more conscientious from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think that, for me, the big legacy with Englehart is that he brought the politics back into Captain America. There's some good, there's some good, even some really good Captain America issues before 153 at Marvel, but honestly, not that many of them. A lot of them are kind of just okay superhero books because there was no real point to the series. Englehart allowed future writers to do things with the book and with the character. He established a pattern. He reestablished the fact that this is an inherently political character, so it's okay to do stories where, he runs for president, or the classic Mark Grunwald storyline where he once again quit being Captain America and took on a different identity. That's one of my all-time favorite storylines. I love that storyline, and not just because it's a direct influence from this storyline, but just the idea that someone writing Captain America almost has a responsibility to address the issues facing America is something that Englehart really put into play, and I think is his lasting legacy on the series.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have had characters later on like Flag Smasher and folks like that, and then even the Watchdogs. You wouldn't have had these characters later on if it hadn't been for this. We'd have been getting more one-offs with Scorpion and another Red Skull storyline. Batrock's going to show up for a month here, and just kind of go nowhere, mean nothing issues. But this, to your point, really set the standard of this book needs to be about more than just Cap punching the Red Skull month in and month out.
Yeah, I mean, fighting Nazis is easy, but Nazis are not relevant these days. They weren't relevant in the 60s or 70s either. So Englehart's simple, obvious premise is, instead of having Cap fight Nazis, let's have Cap fight things that matter today, like the SLA, like Watergate. It's a simple idea, and for me, it kind of rescued the character of Captain America and allowed him to remain relevant even till today.
I would say this. I think that it rescued his solo book, because I think Steve still could have been part of the Avengers, and in a team concept, he still would have worked, because that's a group of heroes fighting a common foe. But from the standpoint of a solo series, without it, wouldn't have lasted much longer, because it just wasn't a relevant piece of literature, as it were, in the 70s.
That's it for this episode of the Classic Comics Forum podcast. I'd like to once again thank the Captain for joining me for this discussion. I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation, and I hope you'll join us next time as we once again dive into the long box of history. And as always, visit us online at classiccomics.org to join in the conversation.